The bet is on. Whoever loses her virginity first wins. Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. This time I'm coming your way to review a movie that I had no idea existed until this year, probably like May. I think it was May. I was looking on Blu-ray.com at for some reason I started looking at this spring, as you might know, at I used to look at Blu-ray.com many times a day at their Blu-ray sales and stuff, new sales, and then for some reason I clicked the iTunes sales, and then I started looking. Now I look at every day, several times a day, the recent Blu-ray and iTunes/Apple TV sales, and for some reason I was looking at the Apple TV recent sales on Blu-ray.com in May, I think, and scrolling down the posters and stuff, and there was this poster for this movie called Little Darlings, which I heard nothing about, or I haven't ever heard anything about. Before I get into all that, I'll simply say that stopping on by this time to review the film from 1980 by the name of Little Darlings. As I was saying, up until May of this year, 2025, I had no idea that this movie existed. Earlier, or was it last year? Sometime in recent months, it might have been last year over the winter or whatever, I did get the Criterion Blu-ray release of Paper Moon, a movie I first saw when I was a teenager in the mid-90s on Laserdisc, the famous movie, Peter Bogdanovich movie with Ryan O'Neal and his daughter Tatum O'Neal. I think that might be how to say her name. And in that review, I wasn't sure if she had done any other movies, and turns out, well, of course, she did do other movies. And this spring, when I came across this this little movie poster on Blu-ray.com and the iTunes/Apple TV recent or new sales at the time, the thing that caught my eye was the older version of Tatum O'Neal, and I'm like, Little Darlings, what the hell is this? Turns out I click it. Watched your trailer, turns out it's like Tatum O'Neal and this other girl which I've never necessarily heard of before by the name of Christy McNichol. She might have been a kind of a popular face, I suppose, maybe late 70s, early 80s, whatever, but it's a face that I can't necessarily remember ever seeing, and I'm like, holy crap. I'm almost 50, and I'm a big, huge fan of summer camp horror movies, summer camp slasher movies, summer camp comedies, summer camp, like maybe even comedy/drama, like Indian Summer. I've never heard of this, and sure enough, it came out, a year after Meatballs, the same year as one of my favorite movies of all time, Friday the 13th, and I've never heard about this movie, and I was like both excited and disappointed at the same time, like mostly excited, because it's like, wow, I get to see a brand, for the very first time, I'm almost 50, I get to see a movie from 1980, another summer camp movie. And it's just like, that was very exciting to me. So I quickly researched it. I was able to see it on YouTube for free. And that's how I first saw it. The sale, incidentally, for the Apple TV version was $5, and then I was like, God, that's a really good price. And then I researched it even more, and I found out that Vinegar Syndrome years ago, I don't know, I suppose within recent years, had put out a Blu-ray, maybe a 4K, probably their famous 4K/Blu-ray combo, which probably costs upwards of $30 or more. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm probably, this movie's probably not worth that, but sure enough, the freaking version of it that's on Apple TV is probably that same Vinegar Syndrome beautiful 4K scan. So I saw something on might have been a DVD version that was on YouTube, and I'm like, yeah, this is probably worth owning on Apple TV for $5. So I ended up getting that, and I will say that the difference between the YouTube version I saw and the Apple TV version is just night and day. The Apple TV version, which is probably the Vinegar Syndrome version, is wow, it looks really good, and some of the colors are so like colorful. Like I showed it to Beth just last night, and I'm like, it almost looks like it almost looks like the movie's colorized sometimes. Like the color is like, the green leaves are just so green. It almost looks like a fake color every now and then. But yeah, it was really cool. Although this movie isn't that big a deal or any kind of life-changing movie by any means, it's really, really cool. And this is what I keep saying in these reviews over and over and over. is that you don't need to watch. It doesn't matter that movies mostly suck now. You don't need to watch new movies. You can spend, there's so many old movies that there's plenty of old movies, to last for several lifetimes to experience for the first time, and get to and have old movies come into your life and become a part of whatever you kind of watch on repeat or whatever. And it's just so cool to me. It's just so weird to me that this movie existed for this long a time and I didn't know anything about it until now. And like I say, when recently or whatever in the past year when I reviewed Paper Moon, I'm like, didn't even know at the time if Tatum O'Neal was even in anything else. Well, it turns out she is a little older, and even better yet, even in color. And so it was really an interesting experience, finding out about this movie and just like, wow. And one of my favorite years of all time, in 1980, man, came out in 1980, the same year as Friday the 13th. I just, to me, call me a geek or whatever, but that's just so cool. And I saw it for the very first time in 2025. That's just insane. One thing I want to say right off the bat is the opening credits are kind of interesting because, having grown up with the film from 1986 by the name of April Fool's Day, when the opening credits started on this film, Little Darlings, I was very kind of surprised to see, like, it looked like very close to the April Fool's Day credit font, and even the same like yellow color, which was kind of interesting. Paramount, just like April Fool's Day would go on to be. So it makes you wonder if, April Fool's Day, used the Little Darlings font and color just because or whatever. But that was something that I noticed initially when the opening credits started. That was funny. This movie revolves around two, I guess, teenage female characters. One, Tatum O'Neal, who's the rich kid, and the Christy McNichol, or I think that's her name, is the kid who came from, to quote Herman from Sleepaway Camp 3, from lower class home. Christy McNichol is kind of the poor girl, and Tatum O'Neal is the rich girl, and they both find themselves meeting each other at summer camp and bunking with this other group of girls. And it should be said that it's funny, just like with a year prior in Meatballs, how that revolves more around guys more or less, and this one revolves around a cabin full of main character girls characters. And Meatballs, of course, famously has, like so many of these movies do, Animal House and all these kind of comedies, has kind of heavier set guy who's always eating, candy bars and stuff. And what I found so strange about this a year after Meatballs, and I guess even Animal House, is that you've got a cabin full of girls, and there's one heavyset girl who's always eating candy bars and dumps out a bag of candy bars and junk food into a drawer as soon as she gets into the cabin. So it's just interesting how these movies all kind of have, in a lot of ways, the same staples and stuff, and same kind of side characters and this and that. Meatballs, it's a guy. This movie, it's a girl. And another thing to mention, that makes perfect sense, although I'm pretty sure this is directed by a guy, if memory serves. The two writers of this movie were female, of the female persuasion. They're basically women. So it only makes sense to have women write this kind of very woman or teen adolescent girl focused movie, because they're probably going to know a lot more about it than guys are going to know about it, which is basically a story about these two, the rich girl that I already mentioned and the poor girl, meeting at summer camp, and this kind of uppity teen bitch who's like a model or something for a TV commercial is kind of this uppity teen bitch who is kind of starts picking on both of them, and basically gets, basically talks to them and everyone else. God, being a kid and a teenager was such a pain in the ass. Peer pressure. I didn't have to deal with all that much of it. I kind of tried to, be invisible as best I could. I didn't have to deal with all that much drama, but when you watch a movie like this, it's like, God, I'm so glad I'm not a kid or a teenager anymore, because just the bullshit that, they put, kids put each other through, or, potentially can. It's just like, so anyway, this uppity model bitch who was in a commercial and still gets residual checks, a whopping $100. We don't know how often she gets the $100 residual checks from her, commercial job. But she basically talks these two girls, the Tatum O'Neal and the Christy McNichol characters, into kind of a race, kind of like American Pie would end up doing in 1999, a race to see who can. And American Pie probably ripped off this movie, honestly, if you really think about it. There's a lot of similarities of which that I won't spoil. That might have already spoiled some, but a race to see who can lose their virginity first, and that's what the whole movie's basically about. And honestly, when I first saw it, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of shallow and kind of nasty. And when the first couple times I saw it, like I really found like the way that bitch model character was to the other girls, just the female characters being so coarse and nasty. But I mean, honestly, being written by two women, I mean, honestly, it's probably unfortunately even way back then, and they probably based their experiences on things they experienced, who knows, decades even before that. But I can only, it's very possible that this is how girls behave, probably even worse now. And like I say, it's just such a shame, that that's the case and stuff. So the first several times I watched it, I found it, to be kind of more coarse. But when I revisited it yesterday, I guess you know what to expect now, and the coarseness and the nastiness of the characters wasn't as jarring as it was, for me the first several times watching it. This movie does have like a song. I think it's the same song that plays during the opening and closing credits, and it kind of very much sounds like early 80s. As a matter of fact, it sounds very similar to like the theme song from the Dudley Moore film around the same time, Arthur. And definitely on the music front, it definitely kind of feels like, the early 80s, whether that's good or bad. I'm not too keen on like the pop, the way those kind of pop songs sounded in the early 80s, that the song for Arthur and the song for this and stuff. But I mean, take it or leave it. One thing else I want to complain about is like some of the music for the movie, like the film score, if you will, has some of this. And it's also featured in like the Sam Peckinpah movie, The Getaway, with Steve McQueen and whatever the hell her name is, the other chick, or the chick who's in it, Ally McGraw. I don't know why. It's just, I'm not a big fan of like, is this a harmonica? Is that you've got instruments and like a harmonica is like first and, front and center, and it's just like, it doesn't play that often, but every now and then if something's happening or, whatever, the kids arriving at camp or driving to camp or whatever happens, it'd be this, instrumental, bit of music and then a harmonica front and center, and it's like, oh God, I really just don't really like that, harmonica sound, but that's just me. Another interesting thing about this movie is I had no idea he was in movies way back this long ago. This movie features a very young, presumably teenage Matt Dillon, and it's just like, holy crap! I had no idea he was in movies back in 1980, maybe even before 1980. But I can remember seeing Matt Dillon in the Blob remake from 1988, thinking, oh wow, this is probably one of his first movies. Cut to 1980. And he's in Little Darlings. It's like, holy crap. So Matt Dillon's been in movies for a lot longer than I thought he was in movies for. So if there's any females out there who happen to have a thing for Matt Dillon and want to see him in Whitey Tidies or whatever, I guess, and you haven't seen this movie and you want to see him as a teenager in Whitey Tidies, that just sounds horrible. Hopefully 18 or older. Feel free to check out Little Darlings. I think Matt Dillon, I'm not any kind of fan of Matt Dillon or anything, but I do think that he is wonderfully cast in this movie. He's basically, there's this lake, and it sounds like on one side of the lake there's a girls' camp, on the other side of the lake there's a boys' camp, and he's on the other side of the lake at the boys' camp, and Christy McNichol character ends up finding that out, and he becomes basically, her conquest, or hopeful conquest, the guy that can she can hopefully lose her virginity with. Another thing I want to mention is, holy cow, I'm pretty much not pretty much, I'm very much an anti-smoker, and I never understood how people end up being smokers. I know that for the most part you probably end up being a smoker because of social pressures, or social fitting in and this and that. I actually asked one guy, I don't know if it was a coworker back, long ago, like, why'd you start smoking? And then the guy's like, well, when you go out on breaks or a smoking break, or you ask a girl if they want to get a smoke. I can't remember what his response was, but it seemed plausible. Like, it's a way to ask women out, it's just like, so you're gonna start smoking to meet women. It's just, I can't remember what his response was, but I'm like, yeah, well, how'd you end up getting, smoking? But it's usually always, more or less a social. You end up smoking because as a teenager or something, or even before that, just because you think it's cool. And Shirley, the character in this movie, that's why they have her smoking. She thinks it's cool, and it gets nauseating, honestly, because every time you cut to a new scene or something, and she's in the scene, it's like, you gotta light up, she's gotta light up, and it's just like, I was actually worried watching this movie if by the end of it I was gonna just have this inexplicable, compulsion or inexplicable urge to go to the store and buy a pack of cigarettes. It's just like, God, they really have that character smoke way too much. And that was one thing that was immediately like jarring, and it makes you wonder. That goes into another thing I wanted to mention. It makes you wonder, of course, nowadays it would be maybe one of the reasons why it would have been rated R, but this movie is rated R in 1980, I think before the rating of PG-13 existed, and I'm at a loss to figure out why this is rated R, because from what I can remember, just revisiting it, it's only got one kind of swear word, shithead, is said once. I guess maybe the scene where the girls are looking at the guys, supposedly skinny dipping, to me it looks like they're wearing flesh-colored shorts. But I can't tell, but you can't even tell if they're wearing flesh-colored shorts or not, and, when the girls are looking at the guys on the other side of the lake skinny dipping with, they're looking at them with binoculars. But that shouldn't have even that. So I'm really surprised. What about this movie got it an R rating in 1980 or 79, whenever the ratings board would have looked at it or whatever? But yeah, it's just like, one would, yeah, I won't say that, but yeah, very strange to me why this movie is rated R. I suppose just this, maybe the adult subject matter of, these two teen girls trying to, get laid or whatever. I don't know why the hell this movie's rated R, because unfortunately yeah, I was going to say that and then I didn't, and then I won't say it now either, but yeah. Here's another strange thing about this movie. Now, this glorious, gorgeous 4K scan, that's probably the same one that Vinegar Syndrome did, that I now own digitally for a whopping $5 on Apple TV. It's the strangest thing in the world, and you probably know what the hell I'm talking about when I say this. Like Amityville 3D, Jaws 3D, and Friday the 13th Part 3, and so many other movies from 1983, like The Man Who Wasn't There with Steve Guttenberg, and probably any other movie that was filmed around the early 80s in 3D. One thing you know about all those movies, if you watch the 2D version of it, is that they look not terribly wonderful, or they look worse than a movie shot in 2D. When you watch a 3D movie from the early 80s in 2D, they have this strange appearance of like certain parts of, it depends on the shot or whatever's going on, but it has this appearance of like this strange focus thing where like things that maybe aren't, focused, this strange aura about, one of these early 80s movies that was filmed in 3D when you watch the 2D version of it on home video. And the strangest thing in the world is this movie, in sections of it, maybe it's mostly the first third of the movie or something, around something like that, some shots in this movie appear like, God, was this movie filmed in 3D and they like abandoned it or something, or decided not to release it in 3D, because it's so much of the early minutes of this movie, maybe like I say, 15, 20, 30 minutes of this movie, the first, they have that same weird focus kind of thing on some of the shots. And then I was watching it, and it's like, there's a shot where the motorbikes are coming at the screen, and the motorbikes shoot the dirt at the screen, and it's just like I was trying to watch it like with the 3D in mind, and then I once I got like a third into it, I completely forgot about the whole 3D aspect. But I think I looked it up to see if it was filmed in 3D and abandoned, but I'm really wondering if this was shot in 3D, and then like by the time, somewhere in post-production they decided, well, hell with it, let's not, it's not worth releasing this in 3D or whatever. But it's really, really, really strange. I can't remember ever seeing a movie, any other movie, that wasn't shot, that wasn't a movie that was known to be in 3D, and seeing a 2D version of just any old random movie and having that same appearance like it looks like one of those movies that was filmed in 3D in the early 80s, and you're watching it in 2D, and it looks worse than a movie just in the early 80s shot in normal 2D, you know? So it really, really makes you wonder, and maybe I should do even more research, but I can't imagine that this movie was filmed in 3D and then like abandoned in post-production, and let's not release it in 3D, or maybe maybe theaters weren't, you know, as equipped with 3D as they thought they'd be in 1980. I have no idea. But if you know what I'm talking about, and a lot of you know, guys probably do, being familiar with Friday the 13th Part 3, Jaws, and Amityville 3D, that, yeah, it's very, very, the image appearance is very apparent when you watch the 2D versions of them. Just the strange, like, I don't even know how to put it into words, just focal aspects of it, you know, there's just some of the shots, you know. And as I said, I was trying to watch the, you know, the movie with 3D in mind, and there are some shots that it's like, wow, it looks like maybe they could be, you know, maybe this could have been an early, you know, 80s, before like 83 and all this 3D stuff. Maybe this was one of the first attempts at early 80s 3D, and as I said, they just abandoned it or something in post-production. But it definitely every now and then has that appearance of being one of those, you know, early 80s movies filmed in 3D. I mentioned earlier that Matt Dillon was basically the focus point of the lower class home character played by Christy McNichol. Well, I didn't mention the male target for the Tatum O'Neal character is none other than a year off of, or I should say a year after the film that I hold in relatively high regard. I kind of enjoy The Prophecy, the monster movie from 1979. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is it Armand Asante or something along those lines? He basically plays the hunky coach guy who it's kind of, I don't know if this is realistic. It kind of makes you anxious when you're watching the movie, even though you know it's just a movie. But why do they have this guy at the girls' camp as like the coach or whatever? But you know, I guess whatever. And that's another thing. Like, it seems like the girls' camp is basically, I think, pretty much, yeah. I can only think of 3 adults that work at this girls' camp. You never see any adults, I don't think, that ever work at the guys' camp, because you don't really see that. But, or, well, I guess if you include the bus driver, that's 4. But, yeah, you can only think of like 3 adults at the actual camp, which is, I can't remember the name of the camp. The camp's name is, oh, I think I just remembered. Camp Little Wolf. Is that the name of the camp in this movie? Having just checked my notes, it is in fact Camp Little Wolf is the name. But yeah, like I said, it looks like the girls' camp is basically just has 1 or 2 or 3 at most adults, and it's just like, especially during the famous food fight scene, it looks like there's barely any supervision whatsoever. And I guess that's how Christy McNichol character can get away with smoking every other second, and they can, you know, she can, you know, steal a bus and you know, steal a canoe and go off and try to screw some guy and this and that. And oh, what I was talking about was, you know, the Tatum O'Neal character gets all hot and bothered by the, you know, the male Studley Armand Asante, or however the hell you pronounce his name, the coach guy, who's, you know, oftentimes without a shirt on and in swimming pool and teaching her to swim and all this and that. And oh my God, it's kind of, you know, pushing 50 and watching this movie and seeing these like teenage girls like trying to, well, I guess to be fair, the Christy McNichol character is going for someone her age, but seeing this Tatum O'Neal character go for like this guy is, I don't know how old, if he would have been in his, you know, late 20s or 30s, Armand Asante or whatever, however the hell you pronounce his name. You know, but yeah, I mean, obviously it's something that happens, you know, young girls get crushes or whatever, but it's really, you know, I will say, like, that's the one jarring thing about this movie that's kind of, and I guess to the movie's credit, that's kind of hard to watch, is both of these girls, you know, they both have their own, you know, their own, you know, hopeful conquests or whatever, and seeing how realistically awkward they are is kind of uncomfortable to watch. And like I say, to the movie's credit, I guess they pulled that off well, I guess. But yeah, obviously I'm not going to spoil the outcome or whatever, but yeah, I mentioned American Pie earlier. If you've seen American Pie, you pretty much know the outcome. I guess I kind of spoiled it, but that's what this movie's about. It's about a girl from higher class establishment and one from a lower class home, both being basically just bullied by this teenage bitch who was in a commercial and earning residual checks, bullied by her to both, have a race to see who can lose their virginity first. And like I say, written by two women, I can only assume it's based on things, I don't know if it's based on things they personally experienced or witnessed in summer camp themselves, but kind of a, mean-spirited movie. That's some of the first stuff I took away with it when I first saw it in May or whatever. And as the time goes on, I kind of let the mean-spiritedness go to the background and kind of enjoy it for what it is. One thing in closing I will say about like all the girls that are like in the the cabin or the bunk that the cabin that the main girls are located in is those group of girls are kind of fun. You've got the one hippie girl, and I've seen the hippie girl is so familiar. I must have seen her in other stuff actually back in the 80s when I was a kid and stuff. And yeah, the hippie girl is very familiar. I should search her and see what the hell else she was in. Maybe TV shows, who the hell knows what. But I'm pretty sure I saw her in other stuff, probably back in the 80s when the stuff was new. And the girl, like with the glass, some of the supporting, teen girls or whatever they are, some of them is even like that one chick who's trying to put, tissue in her, in under her shirt and stuff. Some of them are probably that one's probably younger than a teenager, but some of the teenage like girls that are like the side characters are actually really, enjoyable as to watch as just being, young teenage whatever, actresses and stuff. So. One thing I will say about this movie is like the daytime cinematography is more or less fine. Like I say, the 4K like Vinegar Syndrome or Apple TV version is just glorious to behold. Like I say, it almost looks like it's colorized or goofy, overly saturated or whatever. But one thing I will say is like the director of photography or whoever lensed this, and this is another thing that might be a tell as to the fact that maybe it was shot in 3D originally, is that during some of I'm a really picky bastard when it comes to exterior day scenes and using artificial light with brightly lit already sunny exterior day scenes. There's several instances during the day in exteriors where there's artificial light. You can clearly tell that they're just flooding it with light, and that always just made me, I always wondered about that so much. I'm like, why the hell do you feel like you gotta flood this scene that takes place during the day outside with, you gotta flood it with with artificial light? It's just like, and then I'm just talking about it right now, it's like, God, maybe that's another tell, as I already said, that maybe it was originally shot in 3D. But one thing I will say in closing about this movie is there's some really confusing scenes, and I don't, because of the it's very common, of course, in movies dating all the way back to, early movies or whatever, to film what's called day for night, where you shoot scenes during the day that are supposed to actually take place at night, and you, in post-production or whatever, darken it and stuff to make day look like night. I think there's some of that going on here, but it's so shoddily done that it's like, what? I can't even tell. I'm like, there's no way that's supposed to be night, because there's the scenes that will start clearly what looks like at night, and then they'll go to this location or whatever, and you look out the window and it's clearly day, and it's like, is this supposed to be day or night? And I think several of those scenes are supposed to be night, but it's clearly day. And I don't know if, like, when they did the Vinegar Syndrome transfer, if they just had those scenes be brighter than the filmmakers intended or what. But some horrible, if that's what they were going for, if they were going for day for night, some horrible day for night in this movie that's just like, okay, well, that they completely forgot to like make that look darker, or the DP had no idea how to do day for night or whatever. But I mean, honestly, it's not that big a deal, but I'm kind of a nitpicky about stuff like that. And it's always funny to me when, and it's very rare, honestly, and it's very funny when you do see a movie like this that you're like, is that, it's kind of like Return to Sleepaway Camp, that goofy scene where the paintball scene or something happened where it was like day and all of a sudden it cuts to the next shot, which is supposed to be just the same moment but a different angle, and you're like, it's all dark, and it's like, is this supposed to be dark night now, or what? What's going on? And you're just like, whatever and whatever. But yeah, that's something I thought was worth mentioning. So that's my thoughts on this movie coming into my life when it was 45 years old. This movie existed for 45 years before I even found out anything about it and saw it. It's like I say, it's really cool to be able to see a 45-year-old movie, in this case, this 45-year-old movie for the first time, and just be like, just see as I said, so many reviews that I've done in the past, just the fashions, the music. No, maybe not the music. I don't really like the music in this case, but the cars and some of these young actors and actresses at the time and stuff, and just really cool to have these movie time capsules to be able to go back to a better time when, when things were maybe a little better or whatever in some instances, and maybe not as good in other instances. I don't know, probably mostly better in most instances. But my star rating for Little Darlings would probably be, we can go like, this might be honestly a little high, but I can go 2.5 stars out of 4 stars for Little Darlings. It's yet another summer camp, I guess, comedy to add to my collection of summer camp movies. In this case, a comedy, unlike Friday the 13th, which is not so much a comedy. Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3 are kind of comedy / horror. This is like, I guess, maybe comedy with a little bit of drama. That's one thing that I forgot to say, that in closing yet again, that there's, by the end of the movie and stuff, it does get a little bit deep, and it can be like a cautionary tale, like if teen girls, or even teen guys for that matter, do happen to see this. Well, maybe not, wouldn't really apply to, I guess, teen life 45 years later, but if they were to see it back then in the 80s or whatever, on home video, on TV or whatever, maybe it'll make them think twice about trying to lose your virginity too early, because although it is kind of this coarse, I mean, it's got to, to be real and to be honest, I guess it has to be nasty and coarse and kind of a not so, rainbows and butterflies kind of a movie, and show the harsh reality of situation, and how, things can be not as you expected. But I do think it doesn't, I think it does a good job at not glorifying like teen sexual, whatever, teen sex or whatever, but it is more of a cautionary tale that says, that you don't have to rush into things before you're ready, and this movie would maybe be a good example why not to do that. So a little bit of something to consider. Guess that pretty much does it for my review, which probably went on way too long. What the hell is going on recently or lately with reviews being way too long? I guess it's just me sitting down in front of a camera and just blabbing and blabbing and blabbing. But I guess that pretty much does it for this review. If you watched all the way to the end, all I can say is, wow, thank you so much. No one probably did. If anyone did, thank you so much for doing so. Hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.